This is Lecture 5, and in this first part of Lecture 5 we'll look at the writings of an historian which called into question the motives of the founders, and then we'll look at the ratification process, and this one will be one of the shorter lectures that we have. The founders' interest in protection of property has led some scholars to believe or to question their personal interest as motives in writing the Constitution. Charles Beard, in his book, An Economic Interpretation of the Constitution, which was written in 1913, said that the founders created a constitution that benefited their economic interests. According to Beard, the major conflicts and compromises resulted from the clash of owners of land as property and owners of business or commercial interests. Many scholars today disagree with Beard because voting at the convention did not follow those divisions closely. For example, Elbridge Gerry, the wealthy Massachusetts merchant and politician, and who we get the word gerrymander, refused to sign the Constitution. On the other hand, James Madison and James Wilson from Virginia were both rather modest, were men of modest means, and they were two of the biggest proponents for the adoption of the Constitution. However, the founders did tend to base their votes on the economic interests of their respective states, as reflected in the famous compromises at the convention. Now, the ratification process was interesting. The Federalists left the convention already knowing what they had done, and therefore had a big head start on the group of men that we call the opposition. And the opposition was called the Anti-Federalists. Now, the Anti-Federalists took 2 to 3 months to get organized. Their role in the debate was this. They were opposed to the formal approval of the Constitution by the states. And they argued that the proposed government would be oppressive, and the more individual freedoms and rights should be explicitly guaranteed. What they're speaking about there is, of course, the lack of a Bill of Rights in the Constitution, which existed in most of the state constitutions. The Anti-Federalists also believed that there was going to be too much concentration of power in a central government, which would mean that the states would no longer wield the power that they had since basically 1776. The Federalists, on the other hand, supported the greatly increased powers of the central government and believed that the Constitution adequately protected individual liberties. So there it is. The summer of 1787 is over, and now the ratification campaign rages throughout the states for the next almost year, because they need 9 states out of the 13 to ratify the Constitution, which is 3/4. If my math is right? 3/4? It's getting late. Now, the ratification of the Constitution was defended by the Federalist Papers, and those were written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, primarily the first two. Jay would become the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Marshall would make the position famous. Jay is first. Now, these documents contain some of the most basic and brilliantly argued philosophical underpinnings of American government. The two most famous papers are number 10 and number 51, and we do those two, and you will do 10 in this unit. And then we also do 78, which is about the judiciary. Federalist number 10 argued that separation of powers and federalism check the growth of tyranny. If, and I quote, factious leaders kindle a flame within their particular states, leaders can check the spread of the conflagration through the other states. Likewise, each branch of the government keeps the other two from gaining a concentration of power. Federalist number 10 also argues that constitutional principles guard against the dangers of a direct democracy, or the common passion or interest felt by a majority of the whole. Such direct democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention. Madison argues that a long-lived democracy must manage its interest groups even though these factions can never be eliminated. And factions turned out to be not interest groups but parties. The Federalist number 51 explained why strong government is necessary. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. Now finally in Lecture 5, we're going to look at a couple of things here, and that's the addition of the Bill of Rights. A compromise between Federalists and Anti-Federalists was reached with the agreement to add 10 amendments that guaranteed individual rights and freedoms. With this agreement, the Constitution was finally ratified by all the states in 1789, and the Bill of Rights was added in 1791. Without these crucial additions, the Constitution would not have been ratified in several key states. Many of the recommendations from state ratifying conventions were considered by James Madison as he wrote the bill, and he had a specially appointed committee that submitted 17 amendments to Congress. Congress eliminated 5 of them, and 2 were not immediately ratified by the states. These 2 did not become part of the original Bill of Rights, with 1 dealing with the apportionment of representatives later clarified by Supreme Court decisions, and 1 addressing salaries of members of Congress added as an amendment 203 years later in 1992. But ultimately, the Anti-Federalists got what they wanted, which was a Bill of Rights, which existed in the other constitutions at the state level. Now that is the short Lecture 5, and then we will also do Lecture 6 tonight, which will help out with pages 41 to 55.